So, you've probably heard the Indian stock market is on fire, right? Hitting all-time highs. But honestly, that's not even the most interesting part of the story. A new report from GeoJit has uncovered a huge rebalancing act happening just under the surface, especially during the last half of 2025. Let's break down what's really going on.
Yeah, we've all seen those headlines flashing. Market hits new high. It's great news, for sure. But it makes you wonder, right? In this massive boom, who's actually coming out on top? Because the answer, well, it's changing right before our eyes. Okay, before we dive into the juicy numbers, let's get on the same page with a quick definition. Twice a year, this group called AMFI, the Association of Mutual Funds in India, basically ranks every single company on the stock market by size. Just think of it like a sports league. You got your top 100 in the Premier League, those are the large caps. The next 150 are in the first division, the mid caps. And everybody else, they're in the second division, the small caps. And just like in sports, every 6 months, some get promoted, and others, well, they get relegated.
All right, so let's set the stage here. The big picture for the last half of 2025 was just incredibly positive. The market was absolutely roaring. You know that old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats? Well, that was definitely the case here.
And wow, what a tide it was. The total value of all the companies listed, it hit a new all-time high of almost 470 lakh crores. I mean, just let that number sink in. It's absolutely staggering. And it just goes to show the immense amount of wealth being created in the market.
And this wasn't just a few big players getting bigger. No way! The growth was across the board. The whole market jumped over 10% in just 6 months. And the crucial part? Everybody got a piece of the action. Large caps, mid caps, small caps, they all saw their value go up.
But, and this is a big but, that broad growth is actually hiding the real story here. Because you see, while everyone grew, they didn't all grow at the same speed. And that difference is what's kicking off this massive, fundamental rebalancing across the entire market.
This is where you can really see what I'm talking about. For years, the giant large-cap companies were the undisputed kings. You know, they made up almost 3/4 of the entire market. But look at this now. Their share has dropped all the way down to a multi-year low of just 59%. And who's picking up that slack? You guessed it. The mid and small caps are gaining some serious ground.
So, you might be asking, how did this happen? It's actually a pretty simple story. It all comes down to the growth race. And let me tell you, this race wasn't even close. Over those 6 months, the small caps just exploded, growing by a whopping 16.6%. Mid caps were right behind them at 15.3%. Both of them grew more than twice as fast as the big guys, the large caps, who, well, they only managed about 6.8%.
And all that incredible growth led to something pretty historic. For the first time in a long time, the total value of all the small cap companies is now bigger than the total value of all the mid caps. This is a huge deal. It means the small cap segment isn't some tiny niche part of the market anymore. No, it's a major force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so we've looked at the big picture, the macro trends. Now let's zoom in a little. Let's put some faces to these numbers and talk about the actual companies that are moving, shaking, and even joining the game for the very first time.
To really get a feel for how much the landscape has changed, check this out. It's like the price of admission to an exclusive club has just gone through the roof. 5 years ago, if your company was worth around 29,000 crores, congrats, you were a large cap. But today, you'd better be worth over 1 lakh crore. The bar has been raised dramatically.
So, who actually made the cut? Who got that promotion? Well, this time around, we saw some really well-known names moving up the ladder. You've got companies like Muthoot Finance and Canara Bank graduating from the mid-cap league up to the big time, the large caps. And then you have these high flyers like Poonawalla FinCorp and Apar Industries making this incredible jump all the way from small cap to mid-cap. That's a huge achievement.
But like we said, it's a league. And for every winner, there's someone who gets pushed down a level. Promotions mean relegations. So we also saw some established giants, like Shree Cements and Havells India, slip from that top-tier large-cap list down into the mid-cap category. It just goes to show you how competitive and dynamic this whole thing really is. Nothing is guaranteed.
And you know, a huge part of what's fueling all this change is a massive wave of newcomers. Think about this. In just 6 months, more than 85 companies went public with their IPOs. And we're not talking about small-time players either. Altogether, they pumped over 12 lakh crores of fresh value into the market. That instantly shakes up the rankings and just adds more fuel to this huge rebalancing fire.
Okay, we've gone through a ton of numbers, we've seen the trends, we've talked about companies moving up and down, so what? Why does any of this actually matter to you? Let's connect the dots now and really break down the takeaways from this great market rebalancing.
All right, so let's wrap this all up. Here's what you really need to know. First, the whole market is growing, hitting new records, which is great news. But second, and this is the key point, there's a great rebalancing happening. The big, large caps are losing their dominance to the faster-growing mid and small caps. Third, this shift is so significant that for the first time, the small cap segment is now officially bigger than the mid cap segment. And finally, all of this just proves how incredibly dynamic the market is. The deck is constantly being reshuffled.
Look, this report gives us a perfect snapshot of an incredible 6 months in the market. But it also leaves us with the biggest question of all, doesn't it? This dramatic shift, this pivot towards smaller, faster-growing companies, is this just a short-term trend, or are we looking at the new normal for the Indian market? The answer to that question, well, it's probably going to shape the next decade of investing.